Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Today's gospel reading from Mark is short, concise, and almost bare bones description of an event that I wish was more elaborately described. This event is also reported in Matthew and Luke, who each add informative details. But Mark's is a gospel of fewer words. It doesn't spend time on preliminaries or elaborations, especially for this reading called the Transfiguration. That title alone suggests something special. This mountaintop event marks a pivotal turning point in Jesus's earthly journey. He has, since the very beginning of his ministry, bridged his earthly life and its coming transcendence. Today, Jesus will straddle both worlds, human and heavenly, and it will be for these disciples a preview they won't understand. So when Peter, James, and John are confronted with the dazzling sight on the mountaintop, they are justifiably shaken into fear. Let's go into that story. The very human Jesus invites 3 closely held disciples, Peter, James, and John, to trek up a mountain with him to pray. This seems ordinary, an activity we can identify with. Take a minute and imagine yourself tagging along. You strap water bags over your shoulder, tuck some bread and dried fruit into a bag, and set off with Jesus in the lead, probably early in the morning. You talk amongst yourselves as you get going, but soon drop into a quiet space as you focus on the path to avoid rocks, ruts, and roots that might trip you up. Thoughts, however, fill the quiet space. Thoughts about yesterday, tomorrow, and today, this trek and its prayerful purpose. Peter, for example, may be recalling the recent conversation with Jesus that ended with his saying, "Get behind me, Satan." That would hold my attention for quite a while. Jesus has been trying to prepare all the disciples for his coming suffering, death, and resurrection. But Peter didn't want to hear it. I imagine he couldn't wrap his mind around it, as it was such a threat of loss, personal loss. Like Peter, we may argue with our teacher or our priest or a close friend or a parent who is trying to prepare us for something we don't want to hear. James and John, on the other hand, may have already been calculating how and when to ask Jesus for seats in heaven flanking him, as they soon will. Like John and James, are you in fantasy land dreaming of becoming special and important, maybe even famous? Everyone has things on their minds while following Jesus up the mountain path. That's how we humans are, wandering in our minds, especially out on a hike on a beautiful morning. But we will soon hear God command our attention. Now imagine this. Jesus has upped his pace along the trail and moved ahead. You and his three friends are dragging a bit behind. So coming around a rocky bend in the path, you emerge into a clearing at the top and unexpectedly see Jesus surrounded by light, talking to two other dazzling figures. Mark identifies them as none other than Moses and Elijah, but you wonder, who are they? Where did they come from? How did they get here? Then your eyes and minds are unveiled, and so you just suddenly know who they are. But you hold back by the rocks as the disciples move on into the clearing. James and John are speechless, huddling together and drawing away a bit from that dazzle. Do you think that they want to flee back down the mountain? What is your impulse? Are you more like Peter? Peter's reaction to the sight is very different. His solution to his fear is action. He quickly suggests to Jesus that they could build shelters. He might be recalling the tabernacle, which housed the glory of God for the wandering Hebrews. Or he might be recalling God saying through Moses that God would build a dwelling in their midst and walk among them. Peter's impulse seems to honor such history as he tries to channel his fear and the energy it arouses into something good. Hearing Peter, Jesus turns to look toward them. He doesn't know what to say, but right then, the mountaintop is suddenly overshadowed by a descending cloud. If the dazzling light was not enough to strike terror, now you are all engulfed by a blinding cloud. But there's no time to stumble around because immediately God speaks. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Then, as suddenly as it came, the cloud vanishes. Moses and Elijah vanish. The light vanishes, and James, John, Peter, Jesus, and you are on the mountain alone. God's voice echoes in your mind. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. You all look to Jesus for some explanation, but none is given. Jesus turns, heads back down the mountain, and cautions everyone to hold this experience in confidence until after his resurrection. You follow Jesus and the others back down the mountain in silence. And suddenly, you're back home. Take just a moment to register any thoughts or insights you may have from your imaginative journey. Jesus' disciples, even these three closest to him, often have great difficulty understanding what they hear. What they hear is filtered through their human understanding, through their finite perspective, and the teachings they grew up on with all the related expectation attached. They have expected a Messiah very different from the Jesus they are coming to know. They hear Jesus's words, but they may see a picture in their minds of what they expect to see, even hope to see. This pattern of listening, hearing, and substituting is familiar to all of us. We hear the words of the gospel read each Sunday while we listen, sometimes with only one ear, the other ear being tuned in elsewhere, maybe to our child or the grocery list or our own hopes or dreams or fears or doubts or questions. Sometimes we hear nothing really, or we substitute something we want to hear or would rather hear than what we think we heard. It's confusing sometimes, isn't it? But that's how we are. Real listening takes intentional effort. It is an investment in the speaker. Jesus lived in a time when the oral tradition was still primary for most ordinary folks. There wasn't a scribe among the disciples who was writing down everything Jesus said. Don't we wish there had been? It was decades later when the oral tradition around Jesus's life and ministry and death and resurrection even began to be recorded. These three disciples knew the importance of listening, but their very human nature still made that a challenge. Jesus tells them to be quiet about what they've seen and heard, to say nothing until after his resurrection. They had been through an awesome and fearsome experience of a mind-bending alternative reality, to put it in modern terms. You know what it's like to be holding a secret, especially one you don't quite understand. It's so tempting to share with someone who might explain things. But here in this story, who would that be? Jesus knew they weren't ready to tell the whole story, the true story of what they had experienced that day. So he told them to keep it amongst themselves. This event of transfiguration, showing the glory of Christ, was a pivotal point in Jesus's ministry. The timing of our reading about this remarkable event marks a turning point in our liturgical year of remembrance. Like those in the story, we will soon step onto a descending path. For us, this is from the pinnacle of Epiphany, celebrated today, into Lent, where from Ash Wednesday forward, for 40 traditional days, we will enter a different space for listening, for seeing, and for learning, a space of ashes and dust, until we confront, finally, the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Where shall we go on our Lenten journeys? Shall we trek through some scripture? Go to a mountaintop to pray? We can take with us our imagined experience of this memorable mountaintop story to enlighten our 40-day journeys. But a meaningful journey takes more than just imagination. It takes real intention. Intention demands discipline. Discipline requires practice. We have our instruction. Listen to him. This means we must intentionally take charge of our wandering minds, discipline our thoughts into focus, and practice putting our whole attention on God. Because, as we learned from the 2 Corinthians reading, God will shine into our hearts the light of the knowledge of the glory of Christ. Amen.